Okay, so last time we left off uh, on John Adams. John Adams had passed the Alien and Sedition Acts, which was really probably unconstitutional because they criticized, you could get thrown in jail for criticizing the federal government and the president, and it was aimed mainly at Democratic Republican newspapers who were criticizing the president. And they would throw people in jail. And you would think, well, that violates the First Amendment to the Constitution, freedom of the press. But there was really no mechanism to know uh, to determine what laws were constitutional and non-constitutional. The Constitution doesn't say anything about that. And as I mentioned last time, Jefferson and Madison came up with the Virginia, Kentucky resolutions, which suggested that maybe states could nullify a federal law. Well, as I said, that's not going to be anything that becomes an issue because we have a presidential election in 1800. So again, when we get into this election, I just want you to know, when you think things are bad and you think, oh, it used not to be this way, yeah, it was. Because again, this is going to be a nasty election where they called Adams a monarchist, a hermaphrodite, a warmonger, all these things. And they accused Jefferson of throwing a widow out of her house in a snowstorm, and that he had sex with his slaves, which was true, oddly enough, and that he was an atheist. He's not an atheist; he's a deist. But they had all these nasty things. And so the election is really of 1800. It's a rematch of the election of 1796. It's for the Democratic Republicans, it's Jefferson and Burr. And then for the Federalists, it's Adams and Pinckney. The way it worked back then is that electors had two votes, right? So you were thinking, I'm going to vote for this person for president, and probably this person should be the vice president. And so that whoever got the majority electoral college votes became the president, and whoever got the second most became the vice president. All right, that makes sense. But in this election, when the electoral votes are counted, Jefferson and Burr get 73 electoral college votes, and Adams and Pinckney get 65, and strangely enough, 64 for Pinckney. I think one person voted for John Jay as their candidate for vice president. So Jefferson and Burr, 73 and 73, and Adams and Pinckney, 65, 64. So you think, well, there you go. You've got the election all taken care of. You don't, because the way the Constitution is written, you didn't separate who you were voting for president and who you were voting for vice president. So really what you have now is you have a tie. You have a tie between Jefferson and Burr. And Burr, who's an ambitious sort of fellow, starts thinking, well, wait a minute, why can't we have President Burr? President Aaron Burr, El Presidente Burr. He thinks, yeah, why not? Why can't I be president? Well, when no one gets a majority of the electoral college votes, it goes to the House of Representatives to pick the president, and the Senate would pick the vice president. But in the House of Representatives, each state gets one vote. And so if that were to happen today, you'd have to have a third party, and it went to the House. You'd think, well, California gets to pick because they've got 53 representatives. No, they still get one vote. Every state is equal. And so it goes to the House of Representatives. And of course, you can imagine Jefferson's mad, right? Because here's his vice presidential guy trying to take his job. It'd be like being at a wedding and your best man's hitting on the bride, right? So he's a little pissed. It takes 37 votes of the House of Representatives to elect the president, 37. And the person that makes it possible for this to make it through, to get Jefferson president, is Alexander Hamilton. Now, Hamilton hated Adams. He hated Jefferson. But one person he hates more than everybody else is Aaron Burr. He hates Burr. And so he's able to convince enough Federalists to say, look, you can't have Aaron Burr as president. He's terrible. No. And so Jefferson becomes the president. Now, keep in mind that you win the presidency, but you don't take the office of presidency until March 4th. That's going to be that way until 1932. The idea was, it would take a while to count the votes. Of course, we don't have that problem today. I'm kidding, of course. And so there's several months in between before Jefferson is able to take office. Now, for the Federalists, this is a disaster of unmitigated proportions. They've lost the presidency. And by the way, it's a historical election because no one stays in the office, right? This is a peaceful transition of power. Adams, he's so upset he won't even stay for Jefferson's inauguration, gets up and just leaves. He goes, I'm out of here. I hate everybody. But it's a peaceful transition of power. But for the Federalists, as I said, they lost the presidency, and they've lost the House. They've lost both. And so, why am I not recording this? I don't think I'm recording my video. Hang on just a second. I hope that's not the case. Oh, I am recording it. Okay, good. Sorry, I thought I was not recording. So, they've lost the executive branch. They've lost the legislative branch. All's left now is the judicial branch. And so they come up with an idea. And the idea is that they're going to expand the number of judges because judges serve for a lifetime. Does this sound familiar, right? Does the debates that you hear today over the judiciary still sound familiar today, right? These things aren't new. So what they decide to do is they're going to pass a law called the Judiciary Act of 1801. And what that would do is expand the number of federal judges, which means that before Jefferson could take office, John Adams could appoint a slew of Federalist judges, and the Senate could approve them, and they'd have this lifetime appointment. And this is going to get complicated, so bear with me. And that's exactly what they do. Adams starts making a whole series of appointments, and it's all the way up until midnight of March 3rd. Jefferson takes office on March 4th. And John Adams, Secretary of State, is signing commissions. That's one of the things the Secretary of State does. A commission is a piece of paper that says, I have been duly appointed to this judgeship or JP or whatever, and this is my paper proving that I can take that job. And so up until midnight, here's Adams, Secretary of State. He's sitting at his desk and he's writing as many of these out as he can. And standing next to him is the incoming Secretary of State, who will be James Madison. And he's got his watch out and he's looking at his watch, he's looking at his watch. And then when it hits midnight, he tells Adams, Secretary of State, get out of the chair. You're no longer in office, get out. So Adams, Secretary of State, gets his stuff together and leaves. Now, Jefferson gets sworn in the very next day. It's a very simple inauguration. He doesn't do all the Federalist trappings of a military guard or fancy clothes. He rides his own horse. He likes to portray this sort of Republican simplicity, but he's mad. He's mad about these midnight appointments. So what's going to happen? Well, Jefferson tells his Secretary of State, James Madison, he says, look, if anybody comes in for their commissions that have been duly signed, don't give them to them. We are not going to honor those commissions. Now, that's probably not legal, but he says that's what we're going to do. And in comes walking this guy named William Marbury. Marbury had been appointed the JP of Washington, D.C., and said, I'd like to have my commission. And Madison says, get ye benteth, yea, verily. I'm sure they talked like that back then. You're not getting it. We're not going to give it to you. Too bad, go away. Well, Marbury is a good American. And as we know, all good Americans do one thing. They sue. We're a very litigious society, and so he sues. Now, he's going to sue for what they call a writ of mandamus. A writ is a court order. Mandamus meaning a court order telling a government official to carry out his duty, to do his job. In other words, he's going to sue to have the court order Madison to give him his commission. So where's he going to go to? What court is he going to go to first? Well, he's going to go to the Supreme Court first. Okay, now it gets complicated. Courts have different types of jurisdiction, and let's just put off Marbury versus Madison for a few moments. One of them is called original jurisdiction. Original jurisdiction is the power of the court to hear and determine the case first. And then they have appellate jurisdiction, where they review the decisions of lower courts. Well, the Constitution of the United States spells out the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. It says disputes between states and cases involving foreign ministers. It thus leaves up to Congress to determine the Supreme Court's appellate jurisdictions, what kind of cases they can hear on appeal. Well, in 1789, when they passed the original Judiciary Act, which created the federal court system, one of the things Congress did was it expanded the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court so that the Supreme Court could hear cases like Marbury's. Okay, so keep that in mind. So Marbury is suing, and he goes straight to the Supreme Court because the Judiciary Act of 1789 allowed him to do so. Well, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at the time, and probably the greatest Chief Justice of all time, John Marshall, is an interesting character because previously Marshall had had another job. His other job had been, he had been John Adams' Secretary of State, and he was the guy sitting in the chair signing the commissions when Madison told him to get out of the chair. So you would think he might just have a conflict of interest, but he doesn't recuse himself from this case. So Marshall's interest here is not so much who's right here, because obviously he's caught between the Federalists, and Marshall is a Federalist, and the Democratic Republicans about this position. Marshall's job, or what he sees his job is to protect the integrity of the court and the neutrality of the court and the power of the court. So he's got to find a way around this, right? If he rules in favor of Marbury, what if Jefferson just ignores him, right? That's going to be a problem. So what does Marshall do? Well, he tells Marbury this. He goes, we can't hear this case. I'm sorry, you're in the wrong court. Well, Marbury goes, no, I'm not, because if you read the Judiciary Act of 1789, it says you can hear this case. Marshall says, yeah, it does say that in there, but that part of that law is unconstitutional because obviously the Constitution spells out our original jurisdiction and only says that Congress can deal our appellate jurisdiction. So that part of the Judiciary Act, which expanded the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, is thereby unconstitutional. Well, there we go. Marshall's now making the decision on who gets to declare a law unconstitutional. The courts do. This is the power of judicial review. It's a power that's not in the Constitution. It's not specifically said the Supreme Court has the power of judicial review. But Marshall, and I'm summing this up in a very simple way, he said, look, you live in a democracy where the people are the ultimate rulers, and they have created government through this document, right? This Constitution. Therefore, since the people are the supreme rulers, the Constitution must be the supreme law of the land, and that anything that conflicts with the Constitution is therefore null and void. And according to Marshall, it's the job of the Supreme Court to determine what's constitutional and what's not. In other words, to protect the Constitution. And so that's where we got the power of judicial review. And Marbury never gets his position. It's a fascinating case. At least I think so anyway. But I'm a boring person. So let's go back to Jefferson. Now, Jefferson, he really wants to play it like he's this average guy. When he's president, he wears just plain old clothes. In fact, he's walking down the street and somebody goes, hey, can I go see the president? And they go, well, that's him over there. When he answers the door, often he's answering the door in his robe and his slippers. In fact, one senator mistook Jefferson as a servant. But he's still well-mannered. He hires a French chef to cook very expensive meals for his guests. He's always very polite. And when he leaves office, he's heavily into debt because he just didn't make any money. He'd spent a lot of money on his own to do so. Now, Jefferson changes his mind on the idea of the national bank. We talked about that idea of, can you create a bank? He sees the bank now as a necessity. He also begins to retire the national debt. He cuts military spending. He repeals the whiskey tax and other federalist taxes. And in 1803, we get Ohio to become the 17th state after Vermont, Kentucky, and Tennessee, and it made us up to 16. So now we're at 17 states. Go us. All right. So let's talk about what we probably know Jefferson best for, besides writing the Declaration of Independence. And that's the Louisiana Purchase. Now, Britain and France were doing what they always do, and that's go to war. That's basically what they do permanently, right? Up to this time. And so the problem was that Britain, again, is dominant on the sea, France is dominant on land, and France is being run by Napoleon. Now, Napoleon needs cash. And so he decided, maybe I'll just sell Louisiana to the United States. And so Napoleon's minister asked the U.S. ambassador, said, would you like to buy Louisiana? And the U.S. minister's going, holy cow, yes, we would, because it would double the size of the United States. Well, Jefferson's interested because he thought, okay, what happens when Napoleon's done in Europe? Does he come over and try to set up a French empire in the New World? And so he's eager to buy as well. But there's going to be a problem. First off, the terms of the treaty is the U.S. pays roughly $15 million. And they get all of Louisiana territory. The boundaries are pretty vague. I know when you see a map, they've got them all down there, but they're pretty vague. And there were some tenuous claims on Texas, some stronger claims on West Florida. You're going to get some claims to Baton Rouge, Mobile to the Mississippi. This is great. And by the way, I was at Monticello once, and there's a mountain right next to it. And I did ask who owns that mountain right there. And this is back in the early 21st century. I asked this question. And they said, well, the estate of Thomas Jefferson does, the museum does. And they had just bought it. And they bought it because somebody wanted to build a whole bunch of houses on there. And they thought that would ruin the view. And I asked them, how much did you pay for it? And they paid $15 million. So $15 million for that territory of one hill. And then we get all Louisiana for $15 million. The problem here is, if you remember what I talked about with Jefferson earlier, Jefferson is what we call a strict constructionalist, right? In where he believed that, well, I can only do what the Constitution says I can do, nothing else. That's it. So nowhere in the Constitution does it say the president could buy territory. So Jefferson said, look, maybe we need to amend the Constitution. Well, his advisor says, are you crazy, Mr. President? That's going to take forever. Napoleon might change his mind and decide not to sell. And so what does Jefferson do? He changes his view on the Constitution. He now believes there are implied powers. And so he agrees to the purchase. Well, the Federalists, who'd always argued for implied powers, now argue that he doesn't have the right to do it because they're fearful that these new states would be supporting of Jefferson. And so the Federalists say, no, it doesn't say in the Constitution you can buy property, therefore you cannot. So both sides sort of flip, but they do buy it, doubling the size of the United States. And this is going to lead to, when we get here shortly, this idea of manifest destiny, because when you go back to the American Revolution, you start out right with the 13 colonies, and they're about, and this is 1776 at the Appalachian Mountains, and that's it. And at the end of the war, by 1783, they're all the way to the Mississippi, right? More than double their territory. And then by 1803, they have now purchased Louisiana, and they have this another doubling of territory. And so for the Americans growing so fast, they see this as providential, that this is because of God and not because of the Lutherans. So Jefferson wants these new lands explored. He asked Congress to fund an expedition. You know this expedition, Lewis and Clark. In 1804, they leave St. Louis on what they call their Corps of Discovery. They live off the land. They meet local natives. They learn how to make clothes, how to survive. They spend 6 months in North Dakota in the winter. Man, that's got to be horrible. And they sent a bunch of samples back to Jefferson. And if you've been to Monticello, you can actually see a lot of the samples when you first walk in the door. They still have them that he got. Things like prairie dogs and magpies, you name it. And by the way, if you're wondering about dinosaurs, I don't know why you would at this time, but just in case, they knew that there had been dinosaurs, but they just didn't believe that God would allow a species to exist or create one and then make them go extinct. And so a lot of them felt, there were people that thought they would eventually run into dinosaurs somewhere, but they didn't. They later added a French guide and his wife that you know, Sacagawea, who acted as an interpreter. At the head of the Missouri River, they took the North Fork and called it the Jefferson River, always a good thing to do. They crossed the Continental Divide across the Rockies. They had attacks by grizzly bears. They created their own dugout canoes. They explored the Snake and Columbia Rivers to the Pacific, all the way to Oregon. And that'll become the American claim to Oregon. They finally come back to St. Louis after about 2.5 years. And I believe it's Meriwether Lewis who suffers from depression and then eventually goes out and kills himself. But that's Lewis and Clark. Now, Jefferson's very popular. He has strong support in the South. Obviously, he's a Democratic Republican. He's going to have strong support there. But now he's even getting support in New England states. New England states were the stronghold of the Federalist Party. And as they keep adding more and more states, the Federalists believe that that region's going to be less important, obviously, right? You're talking about 4 states in New England, and now you're adding more and more states and they're heading out west, and that means New England less and less important. So there was a group of New Englanders, Federalist New Englanders, who said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make New England its own country. Now, this is a Federalist group called the Essex Junto, and they're led by this guy named Massachusetts Senator Timothy Pickering. Now, of course, you really can't have much of a country with Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire, right? It's not much. What they really need to add to it is New York, because New York is the financial center. It's a big state. They could get it. They could be their own country. Well, how do you get New York to join? Well, they contact Aaron Burr, because Burr had obviously fallen out of favor with Jefferson and his followers. And Burr's ready for some new conspiracy. And then what they propose to Burr is they say, look, what you do, Burr, is that you win the governorship of New York. And then once you become governor of New York, you lead New York and the New England states out of the Union, and we'll create our own new country, and you can be president of this country. Well, Burr is really keen on being president. He goes, I'm in. I just got to win this governor's race. Well, Hamilton hears of the plan and comes out strongly against it. He's saying in the press that Burr couldn't be trusted with the reins of government, that he was a terrible person, some slanderous things about Burr, and Burr loses the election. So Hamilton probably saves the Union again there. Well, Burr is very upset about this. He's didn't like all these slanders against him. And so he's going to challenge Hamilton to a duel. Now, Hamilton doesn't want a duel. His son had died 2 years earlier, in a duel. And usually you tried to find a way out. You'd write letters back and forth about what could be an apology, what wasn't an apology. And they couldn't come to a satisfactory conclusion. So they get on rowboats and they go to this island, because dueling was illegal in New York. So it's out in New Jersey. And there's 4 people there. There's Hamilton and his second, his assistant, Burr and his assistant. They march off their 20 paces. Their assistants turn away. They're not facing this. And the reason they turn away is so that there's no witnesses. Now, supposedly, Hamilton fires his shot first, straight up in the air. When you're shooting straight in the air, that's a sign that you want to end the duel honorably. That's one way to take it. It's also possible that it could have, these dueling pistols had hair triggers. It could have gone off accidentally. In that case, you're thinking, Hamilton, you're going, well, oh, whatever, I'm screwed. Burr takes aim and shoots Hamilton. And Hamilton dies. Burr had run over and said, well, see how he was doing. But then they hurried Burr off the island. And Hamilton said, look, I would not have shot him. So, what a vice president, right? I mean, Dick Cheney shot some guy in the face. He was out of the hospital the very next day. Back in the old days, the vice president shot you, you died. And so Burr dies. And thus ending Hamilton dies, thus ending Hamilton's political career. Now, there are a lot of people that weren't happy about this. Jefferson wasn't happy about it. Adams wasn't. Adams said, look, I hated Hamilton, but I didn't want him to go this way. This is also going to end Burr's political career, obviously. He's indicted for murder in New York and New Jersey. He's also heavily into debt. And he flees to Spanish Florida until the heat cools off. He eventually returns to Washington, D.C. to preside over the Senate. He's not going to be on the table with Jefferson in 1804. They want to get rid of him. He's not going to be running with him at all. So Burr knows that his political futures are up in the air. Well, oddly enough, Burr meets with a man by the name of General Wilkinson. He's an old friend, but he's also a known spy for the Spanish. Now, what they planned, we don't know for sure. But a good guess is that what they wanted was they wanted Louisiana to secede from the Union and set up its own independent republic with, of course, Burr as the new president. Man, that guy wants to be president. So Burr gets General Wilkinson appointed as governor of Louisiana Territory, and then in the summer of 1805, Burr starts sailing down the river from Pittsburgh. And in 1806, he's in Kentucky recruiting adventurers. In other words, trying to get an army up to get into Louisiana. Well, for some reason, Wilkinson gets cold feet and betrays Burr to Jefferson. He says, oh my God, I know what I was thinking, Tommy. I said this to Burr, blah, blah, blah. And so they put out an all points bulletin and they eventually arrest Aaron Burr in Kentucky. He's brought back and he's brought up on trial charges of treason in front of the Senate. Well, John Marshall presides over the trial as this Supreme Court justice. Marshall actually likes Burr and even has dinner with him during the trial. Wow, that seems fair. Jefferson wants Burr to hang, but you've got to have the evidence. And Jefferson won't turn over a lot of his evidence because he says that's the information that's privileged for the president. It's communication between the president and his advisors. Jefferson will not testify, nor will he bring any documents. This begins, again, something that's not in the Constitution, the idea of executive privilege, right? You hear this often with presidents. They don't have to turn things over to Congress because of executive privilege. Well, Burr is found not guilty because there's no witnesses. Jefferson won't testify. And so Burr's found not guilty. Now he leaves for France, but he returns to New York in 1812 and then lives out the rest of his life in New York. He dies of old age at 81. At the time, his wife was suing him for divorce on the grounds of adultery. Wow, Aaron Burr, 81, adultery, what do you know? So that ends the whole Burr thing. You know, when you watch the musical Hamilton, Burr gets off a little bit too easy, I think. And there have been people who try to write books saying Burr's not a bad guy because, you know, if you're going to write a book about Aaron Burr, everybody's already called him a terrible person. If you want to sell a book, you better come up with something else. All right, so let's pop back over to the war in Europe. This is interesting. Well, the British and French are at war again, still at war. One side's dominant sea, the other's dominant land. But there are British and French navies, and they threaten to seize neutral ships. American ships are neutral ships. And this puts American shippers in a bit of dilemma. And the British begin this thing called impressment. Now, impressment is where they would board ships and force suspected English sailors into the Navy. They thought these people were deserters or whatever. Because remember, the way you used to get into the British Navy was because of press gangs, right? The Navy would hang outside bars and stuff. And when drunk people came out, they sort of knocked them over the head and put them on a ship. And then you're in the British Navy now. Well, almost all American sailors could be mistaken as British and be forced into the British Navy. And you didn't want to be in the British Navy. The British Navy was notorious for flogging and whipping and more flogging. It was terrible. Nobody wants to be flogged all the time, except maybe Madonna. That's about it. Well, in the summer of 1807, the British warship Leopard wants to search the American ship, the Chesapeake. Now, the Chesapeake spots the Leopard. See what I did there? Spots the Leopard and says, the Leopard says, look, we want to board your ship and we want to search for deserters. The Chesapeake says, get ye benteth, British people. Then the Leopard opened fires with its cannons and the Chesapeake immediately surrenders. 3 Americans are killed. The British take 4 men off the Chesapeake and hang one of them as a deserter. Now, to be fair, the guy they did hang was a deserter. He had been in town mocking British officers and sailors that were in town, saying, you're never going to get me back again. And yeah, they got him back again. Well, of course, the American public is outraged, right? They're saying the British have just attacked us. We need to go to war. Well, Jefferson doesn't want war. He's almost in the same boat that Adams was when people wanted to go to war with France. So Jefferson's going to try peaceful methods. The first thing he tries is what we call the Embargo Act of 1807. This prohibits ships from leaving American ports from going to any foreign port that was at war. Well, this resulted in no exports leaving the country and no imported goods, because no one was going to come over here and drop off imports and then go back with an empty ship on the way back, right? It would be like you're a trucker and you're going across country with a load and you know that when you come back, it's going to be empty. No, that truck has to be loaded both ways. And so the net result was no imports or exports, which put the economy in a recession. And Jefferson becomes very unpopular. In fact, in the New England states, they even ignore the embargo. They go, forget Jefferson, we're going to keep trading. And so Jefferson, after winning a second term, and we're now in 1808, as we all know, Washington had said no one should serve more than 2 terms. Jefferson's very unpopular, and he's going to leave. The election of 1808 is pretty easy. It's James Madison versus Charles Pinckney of the Federalists. Madison, the former Secretary of State, like I said before, that seems to be the key to being elected president, easily wins the presidency with 122 electoral votes to 47 for the Federalist candidate. But when we talk about Madison and his presidency, it's all going to be about war with him. It's not going to be a popular war at first, especially in the New England states, where they refer to it as Little Jimmy Madison's War, because Madison was only 5'1". So if you think Donald Trump was the first person to come up with nicknames for people, no, they did that way back then too. So Jefferson had repealed the Embargo Act of 1807 right before he left, and so they had to come up with something new, and they come up with the unfortunately named Non-Intercourse Act. This act reopened trade with all nations except for Britain and France. It also authorized the president to reopen trade with any of those 2 nations, Britain or France, that agreed to American neutrality. That didn't work either. So then they replaced it with something called, and you don't really need to know this, Macon's Bill number 2. This opened trade with both sides, but the United States would impose non-intercourse on the other side if one side would have recognized Americans' neutrality. That's really complicated. And the reason it sounds silly to you, because it is silly, is that the Americans aren't good at diplomacy. This is just the beginning for them. They're not sure what to do. Well, Napoleon quickly agrees to recognize American neutrality. And so Madison then declares non-intercourse on Great Britain, no trade. Britain tries to recognize American neutrality. It was going to, but war is declared beforehand on June 18th, 1812. This will be the War of 1812. So why do the Americans go to a war that they're really not ready to go for? Well, one is the idea of neutral rights, that they didn't like their ships being boarded, obviously. Also, there was the idea of the Native American threat. Some felt that the British were arming Native Americans to attack uh, American settlers in the Ohio Valley. And there's a young group of Turks, I guess you want to call it, in Congress. They're known as the Warhawks. And some of these people we're going to talk about for a long time. They are going to be the dominant players for the next 40 years in the United States. And the first that's going to be Henry Clay of Kentucky. We'll talk about Clay a lot. John C. Calhoun of South Carolina is going to be another. Along with, and this one's not one of the Warhawks, Daniel Webster, they're going to be known as the Great Triumvirate, the three people that hold everybody together. Clay from the West, Webster from the North, and Calhoun from the South Carolina. And then the other two Warhawks, Richard Johnson of Kentucky and Felix Grundy of Tennessee. And why were they called the Warhawks? Well, because they would go into Congress marching Canada, 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 because they wanted to take Canada from the British and add it to the United States. And they also wanted Florida. They wouldn't get either one of them because America's not ready for war. The Bank of the United States had been allowed to expire. No. My dog is deciding to relieve himself on my carpet. So, many states had gone bankrupt, or state banks had gone bankrupt, so the government deposits there had been lost. There had been no trade, so no tariff had popped in. The Army only had 6,700 men. Hard to invade anybody with 6,700 men. Many of the officers were old. They were left over from the American Revolution. And they had drinking problems, according to Winfield Scott. So they're not really ready. The Navy only had 16 ships. But it's going to be the Navy that's going to be the heroes of this revolution. They're going to have some of the biggest victories. So clearly the United States isn't ready for a war that they just got themselves into against the British. But what will be their plans for war? How are they going to win this war? That's a topic we are going to talk about next time. Oh, explain a deist a bit. Okay, a deist. That's funny, but then not in, of course, a deist. A deist came about in the Enlightenment period. A deist is somebody who believes that of God, or believe a version of God that's sort of a clockmaker. That he, if you think about a clockmaker, they create a clock and then they wind it up and they let it run. So the deists believe there is a God, but he doesn't interfere in the daily business of the universe or Earth. That the God just sits back and watches what's going on, and that's it. And so this is based on natural law. And so they would argue that Jesus, for example, Jesus isn't the Son of God. He's a great prophet, but there are no such things as miracles because God doesn't interfere in the daily affairs of mankind. And so there were a lot of deists. Tom Paine was a deist. Ben Franklin was a deist. And Thomas Jefferson was a deist. Deism was a big thing. And these are all good people. So you could say they're bueno deists. See what I did there? Thank you. And so that's what I mean by a deist. In fact, there is a Jefferson version of the Bible where he went in and edited the Bible and took out all the miracles, saying that didn't make any sense. So that's what a deist is. And that's what Jefferson was. Jefferson wasn't a Christian. He was a deist. If that makes sense. It does? Okay, good. So